Hi. Hello. My name is Stephanie and welcome, or if you're coming back, welcome back. Either way, I'm glad you're here and I hope you're well. And today we're talking about the final book in the original Dollenganger series, Seeds of Yesterday, by V.C. Andrews. So spoilers for Seeds of Yesterday, well as the first 3 books in the series because we're going to be referencing events from all of them, as well as spoilers for the 2015 Lifetime movie adaptation, also called Seeds of Yesterday, because there's a plot point in it that bothers me and it's my show, and now you have to hear about it, so apologies in advance. Also, content warning for incest, reference child abuse and neglect, on the page child neglect and child abuse, as well as religious abuse, misogyny, and ableism. First, a few timeline things. So, Seeds of Yesterday picks up 15 years from the end of If There Be Thorns. So, in the universe of the Dollenganger series, it is now 1997. 13 years in the future from the time the book was published in 1984. At the beginning of the book, Chris is 55, Kathy is 52, Jory and Melody, who are now husband and wife and have been married for 9 years, are both 29. Cindy is 17 and Bart is 24, literally about to turn 25. So just keep all that in mind moving forward. Now, before we get into the main story, I want to talk about something that I've really only touched on kind of briefly before, and that is Corrine and her 2 brothers. So as I have mentioned before throughout this absolute lengthy journey that we have been on, Corrine was not Malcolm and Olivia's only child. She had 2 older brothers, Malcolm, called Mal, and Joel. Whereas Malcolm doted on and spoiled Corrine, his oldest sons definitely did not get that same treatment. Corrine was very much the golden child in the family. Mal died in a motorcycle accident, and Joel decided he didn't want to waste any more of his life trying to be what Malcolm wanted him to be. So he left home to join a professional orchestra and go on tour in Europe. And as Joel was a very talented piano player, he was incredibly successful and very, very sought after. Sadly, not long after, Joel was killed in an avalanche, leaving Corrine as the sole surviving child and the sole heir to the Foxworth fortune. Put a pin in all that, we're going to circle back to that pretty quickly. We learn more about Mal and Joel in Garden of Shadows, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now, just keep all that in mind. And with that, let's finally get on to Seeds of Yesterday. So 37 years after they escaped, Chris and Kathy have at last returned to Foxworth Hall, which has been meticulously rebuilt by Bart, who, if you remember, inherited the house from Corrine at the end of If There Be Thorns. And when I say it has been meticulously rebuilt, it has been meticulously rebuilt, down to the last detail and restored to its former glory, but with modern for 1997, as imagined in 1984, modern and technological upgrades. And at this point, it's worth talking about Foxworth Hall itself, because it's very much a character in this final novel. So, houses play a massive part in Gothic literature, especially in Gothic horror, which the Dollenganger series very much is. Foxworth Hall isn't haunted in a literal sense. Its ghosts are more of the metaphorical variety, but every moment spent inside of it feels suffocating. And there's this sense of something very, very heavy and something very, very wrong that hangs over everything and every moment in that house. There's also this sense that once Foxworth Hall, gets its claws into you, it's never going to let you go. It's a beautiful house, yet there's something deeply sinister about it, and something very, very dark that kind of permeates the whole thing that can't be erased by it being rebuilt. That darkness is still very much there and very, very heavy and very present. So why, after everything that happened there, after everything they suffered under that roof, would Chris and Kathy come back to this place? Because of Bart. Bart is a few days away from his 25th birthday, meaning that he's about to come into his part of the Foxworth fortune. So he's throwing a massive, extravagant party to celebrate a couple things. Number 1, him coming into his fortune. Number 2, the fact that the house is now finished. And number 3, that a few days earlier, he graduated valedictorian from Harvard Law, just like Elle Woods would have wanted. And he's invited his family to celebrate with him. Now you might be thinking, Stephanie, that's great. He invited his whole family. Things must be good between Bart and everyone now, right? Yeah, not so much. Don't look at the runtime. So, while away at college, it seems like Bart had very minimal contact with Chris and Kathy, and even less with his two siblings. And while things are not as bad as they were when he was 9 and under the influence of John Amos, that tension, that resentment, that jealousy, and to be blunt about it, that hatred is still very much there, to the point where Cindy flat out refuses to attend his graduation and instead goes to a friend's house because he has spent her entire childhood tormenting her. "No," she shouted over the telephone, "I don't care if he did send me an invitation. It's just his way of showing off. Put 10 degrees behind his name and I still won't admire or like him. Not after all he did to me." Again, given that Bart spent her entire childhood tormenting her, I don't blame her in the slightest for not wanting to attend. The only one that Bart really, really wants there is Kathy, who he still resents yet adores to a kind of unhealthy degree. Put a pin in that, we're going to circle back to that. But he realizes that Kathy wouldn't come without Chris and Jory and Cindy, ergo they get kind of a pity invitation to everything when she's really the only one that he wants. "Must be there, Mother, when I come into my own. Not a word about Chris being there with me. It's important to me that you be there." Always, he had to force himself to speak Chris's name. "We'll invite Jory and his wife down too, and of course, Cindy." He'd grimace just to say her name. And all that hatred, all that resentment, all that jealousy is still very much there. However, the Bart that we meet when Chris and Kathy arrive is simultaneously very different from the boy that we left when at the end of If There Be Thorns, and yet very much not. Bart very much takes after the late Bart Winslow, his biological father. He's incredibly handsome, he's very, very charming, he's incredibly smart, and he's very successful. Yet he's still very much that insecure kid, and that manifests in him being very worried about his image and constantly wanting to impress other people and show off his success. One of the things that we find out later about him is that he's had his shoes treated so that the bottoms of them never show scuff marks. Again, this is very different from kind of the perpetually dirty and banged up little kid that Bart was when we left in If There Be Thorns. I think this is partially because his cleanliness is a thing that he can control. It is something that he has absolute control over, but also I think it's a way for him to kind of impress people and to show how far that he's come. Has come incredibly far. He is incredibly successful. But Bart is also, to be very blunt about it, Bart is mean. He is mean. He spent years tormenting Cindy and continues to do so at his grown age. He is 24, literally about to turn 25, beefing with a 17-year-old child. Unhinged behavior, truly. He also looks down on Jory and Melody and basically everyone else who is not him, often making cruel jabs at them, especially at Chris, who he despises. I think the only one he hates more than Chris is probably Cindy. And it's pretty close. And then there's the constant worry that Kathy has for Bart. Although he spent years in therapy and the Malcolm persona is seemingly gone, this has been reassured to her time and time again by his doctors, and Bart is seemingly happy and successful, Kathy worries that the darkness that infected him so long ago might just be lying dormant, especially given Bart's obsession with finishing Foxworth Hall and being back there after, well, everything that happened there. Despite that, Kathy tries to be optimistic, yet she can't help this feeling of dread that she feels back at this place where they suffered so horribly, and she's valid to feel that way. This feeling of dread and unease only worsens when Chris and Kathy are greeted by Bart's new best friend and closest confidant, Joel Foxworth, back from the dead after 57 years. So, as you might have guessed, Joel survived the avalanche, but he was badly injured and ended up buried in the snow. Thankfully, he was rescued by monks who took him to their monastery, which was nearby, and nursed him back to health. And then Joel just stayed. He stayed there for almost 60 years. And while there, he became a very religious man, and he's just as obsessed with fire and brimstone and hell and sin and damnation as John Amos, Olivia, and Malcolm before him. So, why after all these years and seemingly being content with life as a monk in a monastery, has Joel finally returned not just to Foxworth Hall, but to the States? Well, according to Joel, an American journalist came to the monastery a few years ago about what it's like to be a monk in the modern world. And as Joel was the only member of the order who spoke English, he represented them in the article. And it was from the journalist that Joel learned that Malcolm and Olivia were dead. Again, Malcolm is one of the richest people in the United States and was involved in various industries and deeply entrenched in politics, so he was fairly well known. And that got Joel thinking about his last living sibling, Corrine. And so a few years later, he headed back to the States. And once he was back in the village, he learned that Foxworth Hall had been burned down by Corrine, and she had been institutionalized. He didn't learn she had died until Bart arrived a few years later to oversee the completion of the house every summer and filled him in on everything else. And Bart, who is desperately searching for a father figure, as he still feels that Chris genuinely does not love him as much as he loved Jory, and he can never truly love Chris or forgive him for the sin of being with his sister. And having never known his own father and having been lied about his own father's identity until he was literally 9 years old, Bart is constantly searching for a father figure. Thought he found that in John Amos all those years ago, and now he thinks he's found it in Joel. Of course, naturally invited to come back home and live in Foxworth Hall. So that sounds, it sounds nuts. It sounds nuts. And is any of it true? I think at least part of it, but I don't think Joel comes home for the reason that he says. Kathy speculates that Joel is here for the money, that he's going to try and break Corrine's will. And while I think she's right, I don't think it's just about the money. Make no mistake, it's definitely mostly about that, but I don't think it's as simple as being just about the money. We'll get to that later. And regardless of the reason, Joel is very much a dark and foreboding presence in Foxworth Hall, and he is very much digging his claws into Bart and trying to influence him and the way that he thinks, just like John Amos did all those years ago. So understandably, none of this, being back in Foxworth Hall, lingering darkness that still hangs over Bart, the long-lost family member back from the dead with a kind of fishy story, the tension in the family, and the constant worry that the villagers are going to find out that Chris and Kathy are brothers and sister, pass the vibe check for Kathy. But Chris, ever the optimist, assures her that everything will be fine, that no one outside their kids and Jory's wife know that they're brother and sister. This party and Bart coming into his inheritance is a chance for Chris to make peace with him and rebuild their relationship once he sees how well Chris has managed his money and the funds over the years, which will help the tension in the family and heal those old wounds. And Joel is a harmless, albeit kind of weird old man, and after the party they'll be on their way to Hawaii, leaving all this behind once and for all. Chris recently retired and they're planning on moving there. And Kathy tries to share that optimism, she really, really does. But there is no peace to be found in Foxworth Hall, especially because Bart puts them in the Swan Room, a rebuilt version of Corrine's old bedroom, complete with a reproduction of that grand swan bed that we talked about very briefly in Flowers in the Attic. And I think he did that on purpose to hurt Chris and Kathy, because it's the room Corrine shared with Bart Winslow, with his father. It's a way for him to dig the knife in and to make them feel guilty for being together. And being in that room, in that house, in that bed, despite it being new and rebuilt, makes Kathy very, very uneasy. I lay in the semi-darkness and stared around me, feeling strangely out of myself. In and out of my mother I flitted, sensing 4 children locked in a room overhead in the attic, feeling the panic and guilt that surely must have been hers, while that mean old father down below lived on, threatening even when he was out of sight. Born bad, wicked, evil. It seemed that I heard a whispery voice saying this over and over again. I closed my eyes and tried to stop this craziness. I didn't hear any voices. I didn't hear any ballet music playing. I didn't. I couldn't smell the dry, musty scent of the attic. I couldn't. I was 52 years old. Not 12, 13, 14, or 15. And so Chris and Kathy try their best to settle into life at Foxworth Hall. And meanwhile, Bart is planning a Kardashian-level birthday party, complete with a full functioning theater stage he's having built on the grounds, having crates of expensive champagne delivered, and putting together an extravagant menu from a highly sought-after caterer. And that's to say nothing of the massive guest list, which includes literally every member of Virginia high society, as well as some very prominent contacts he made while at Harvard Law School. It's getting a bit out of hand. And when Kathy points this out and tries to urge Bart, like, hey, maybe you should keep this more low-key, because the villagers literally hate the Foxworths. They hate them. They have always hated them, because the Foxworth family often prospered while they struggled and had nothing. It's also heavily implied that at least one couple that Chris and Kathy interview when they're hiring staff for the house at least very strongly suspect who they are. But Bart won't hear any of it. Food will be the best. I'm having a theater constructed in the midst of a wonderland of fantasy, where tables will be covered with beautiful cloths of every color, color upon color. Flowers will be banked all over. I'll show the world just what a Foxworth can do. And all these years later, Bart is still playing at being Malcolm, except he's not just playing at being Malcolm, he's trying to outdo him. And despite all his success, all his material things, all the prominent friends he's made, all the money he's about to inherit, like I said, Bart is still that insecure kid, desperate for people to like him. And now he has all the money in the world to throw at them in the hopes of impressing them and making them like him, of finally being someone's favorite. And Kathy, ever observant as she is, can see that. She can see that for all the things he has, all the wonderful things that have happened to him, Bart isn't really happy. And she asks if he doesn't want something more from life than just money and success. However, when it comes to romantic relationships, and especially with women, on admission, Bart just doesn't have issues with these things. He has a full-on subscription. For your reference is right after Kathy asks if Bart ever thinks about getting married or having children, or even just having a few good friends. I've experienced sex, Mother. I didn't enjoy it, but I did. I felt my body betrayed my will. But I've never been in love. I can't imagine how it would be to devote myself to one woman when so many are beautiful and only too willing. I see a beautiful girl walk by, I turn and stare, only to find her turning and staring back at me. It's so easy to get them into my bed. No challenge at all. He paused and turned his head to look at me. I use women, Mother, and sometimes I'm ashamed of myself. I take them, discard them, and even pretend I don't know them when I meet them again. They all end up hating me. Again, even all these years later, we can see just the detrimental effect that John Amos and Malcolm's Journal have had on Bart and the way that he views women and sex and romance and relationships. Kathy feels desperately sorry for him and desperately wants to help him. He's her son. She loves him. She loves him deeply despite what Bart thinks. And so she tries to explain what love is like and why there's more to life than just money and things and grand parties. And so Bart, I think partially out of genuine curiosity, but also kind of as a way to hurt her, asks which of her many loves that she loves the most. Tell me more about your loves, about which man you loved the best. Was it Julian, your first husband? Or was it that wonderful Dr. Paul? I think I would have loved him if I could remember him. He married you to give me his name. I wish I could see him in my memory like Jory can, but I can't. Jory remembers him well. He even remembers seeing my father. His manner turned very intense as he leaned to lock his eyes with mine. Tell me that you loved my father best. Say he was the one and only man who really seized your heart. Don't tell me that you only used him for your revenge against your mother. Don't tell me that you used his love to escape from your love of your own brother. Kathy straight up admits to Bart that, yeah, initially the only reason I was with your father was because I wanted to get revenge on my mother, because I wanted to hurt her. But looking back all these years later, that was the wrong thing to do, to use him like that. And she assures Bart that she did 100% love his father. She cared for him as much as she could have at that time. And so Bart asks if Kathy thinks he will ever find someone to love him, who he truly is, rather than for his money. Because again, even as an adult, he desperately wants someone to pick him first, to choose him over everyone else. Like I said, I don't like what Bart becomes in this book, but I do feel for him at points, and this is one of them. Because in so many ways, he's still that lost kid. That's not to say he doesn't suck, because make no mistake, he does very much suck, but you can't help but feel for him. And that's on good writing, baby. And Kathy tells Bart he should leave this place. He should go be a lawyer somewhere far away and make a real life for himself, where he can make real friends and fall in love and not worry about people using him for his money and connections. Because Kathy knows what Bart doesn't. That Foxworth Hall is a poison. And eventually, it infects everyone inside of it. That's when Bart drops the absolute bombshell that he is no longer Bart Sheffield. He is Bart Foxworth. He has had his name legally changed. I'm sure this is fine and totally not a harbinger of things to come. And while the party planning is underway, Joel is walking around being creepy and cryptic, and tensions are high. Jory, Melody, and Cindy begin to arrive at Foxworth Hall. So, Jory left home for New York as soon as he graduated high school to dance under his grandmother, Madame Marisha. Marisha sadly passed away a few years earlier. R.I.P. Madame Marisha, you would have loved Abby Lee Miller. And Melody, who was a year younger, followed him a year later after she graduated, and they married not long after that. So because of these things, not going to college and marrying so young, like I said, Bart very much looks down on Jory and Melody. Or rather, he pretends to, because he's actually still insanely jealous of Jory. Because Jory and Melody are wildly successful. They are world-famous ballet dancers. They are beloved. They have tons of friends. They are beautiful. They are happy, and they are deeply in love. And just like when he was a kid, Bart still feels like he is only second best compared to his older brother's. Feelings, I think, are made only worse by the fact that Jory ain't all that impressed by all the things Bart has. He's happy for him, very much so, and he's glad Bart has these things. You know, he's happy for his little brother, but Jory also has his own success, international acclaim. And unlike Bart, Jory is actually content with his life and what he has. However, the years apart seem to have done them good because they're genuinely happy to see each other and even embrace. Although Bart is very cold and distant with Melody like she is with him, Bart is even incredibly happy when Jory and Melody announce that she's pregnant. However, it soon becomes obvious to Kathy and to us that it isn't Jory's success and popularity that Bart is jealous of, not really. It's Melody. Bart wants his brother's wife. And this absolutely terrifies Kathy, because there has always been so much animosity between her sons, so much jealousy, so much resentment, that this is only going to make things so much worse. And oh my god, it does. It gets so much worse. But for now, Bart has plans for Melody and Jory. The reason he built the stage is because he wants them, these internationally famous ballet dancers, perform a dance at his birthday from the opera Samson and Delilah. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of Samson and Delilah, it's a story from chapter 16 of the book of Judges, which is a part of the Old Testament in the Christian Bible. In the story, Delilah loves a man named Samson who has superhuman strength. However, she's bribed by his enemies to discover the source of his strength, which he finally tells her. His strength comes from his hair. And once she learns this, she cuts off his hair, and thus he loses his strength and turns him over to his enemies, who then gouge out his eyes. Put a pin in that. Put a pin in all that. It's relevant. I promise we're going to come back to it. But because Melody has a high-risk pregnancy, her doctor has advised her against taking on any strenuous roles, which the role of Delilah very much is. So much to Bart's annoyance, she refuses. However, as Cindy is arriving soon, Jory offers to dance with her, which Bart is not happy about, because again, he actively hates Cindy. However, Kathy tells him that he can't keep treating her the way that he does. So naturally, when Cindy arrives, Bart, excuse the language here, is still a complete and utter dick to her. The Cindy we meet is bright and bubbly and beautiful and friendly, but she can also give as good as she gets when it comes to Bart. And she can also be incredibly mean and incredibly petty. She's very much everything Kathy could have been if her childhood hadn't been so horribly stolen from her. And out of spite, Cindy agrees to dance with Jory. Despite having a lot of potential in ballet herself, Cindy gave up dancing when she was a kid because Bart bullied her so badly. Like I said, he's a dick. And Cindy is good. She's not on the same level as Melody, but she's good. However, as the party grows closer, Kathy begins to feel more and more uneasy. And you've got Joel hanging over everything like a shadow, calling Jory's dancing sinful and muttering about how the Lord giveth and how the Lord taketh away. And Bart's party is a real source of contention between him and Joel. Joel thinks the money Bart is spending is obscene and that the whole thing is sinful and wasteful. But again, Bart will not hear it, and so preparations continue. And on the day of the party, everything is perfect. It is perfect down to the last detail. And Kathy tries to be helpful. After the party and the will reading shortly thereafter, Bart will have everything he's wanted for so long, and maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to find some happiness. And she and the rest of the family will leave Foxworth Hall behind at last. But this is the Dollenganger series, baby. We can't have nice things, so let the nightmare begin. And the nightmare starts, of all places, with the dress that Cindy wants to wear to the party. And I'm going to read the full description of this dress to you, just so you can get the full effect, okay? Full disclosure, this passage, and sadly a lot of passages about Cindy, get very misogynistic and very slut-shamey, so apologies in advance and just for your reference moving forward. I don't know where Cindy found the shocking red dress she wore. It seemed the kind a hooker would wear to display her charms. I filled with such sickening dread of Bart's reaction that all my former happiness flowed down like stale wine, down into my slippers and disappeared through the floor. My God, V.C. Andrews was a good writer. The thing she wore clung like a coat of scarlet paint. The neckline plunged almost to her waist, and obviously she wore nothing underneath. Cindy 100% does this to piss Bart off. She even picked a red dress because she knows it's his favorite color. And he reacts about as well as you expect, which is to say super badly. He slaps her so hard that she falls down. And this cascades into a mess of name-calling and arguing and slut-shaming between the two of them that ends with Bart chasing Cindy upstairs to her room and spanking her, which is wildly inappropriate and deeply weird no matter what she did, because she's his 17-year-old sister, and in my opinion, everyone lets it go way too easily, because that's creep behavior. And honestly, I think they let a lot of the things Bart does kind of slide because they're afraid of how he's going to react. He had such violent outbursts as a child that now they kind of perpetually walk on eggshells around him. So I think that's why they let a lot of his more nefarious and cruel behavior slide. Including this. Kathy even tells Cindy that she deserves it, which I don't love. However, when the guests start arriving, Bart is the perfect, charming host, and things are going relatively smoothly after that very disturbing bit of family dysfunction. However, Bart and Cindy get into it again just before she's about to go change and get ready to perform with Jory. Now listen, Cindy, you'll put on your costume when the time comes and forget anything happened between us. You'll perform your part to perfection, okay? Playfully, he pinched her cheek. So playfully his pinch left a deep red indentation on her face. She squealed and kicked out, as she should. Her high heel dug into his shin. He yelped and slapped her again. My brother, I would fight him in the street, but I digress. And thankfully Chris comes and breaks them up because they're both way too old to be acting like that. Again, Bart is now 25 years old, literally beefing with a 17-year-old child. And so the party rages on until it's time for the dance. And Jory and Cindy do an amazing job until the climax, when it all goes horribly wrong. During the climax, when Samson has been blinded and God at last returns his strength, a boulder falls and hits Jory, making him fall, and part of the set comes crashing down. There were these two pillars that had been filled with sand to make them stand upright, and the sand starts pouring out onto Jory, and he is badly hurt and needs to be rushed to the hospital, with Chris literally performing life-saving first aid on him at the party and in the ambulance to keep him stable until they get him to the hospital, where he undergoes emergency surgery. And the next day, they learn Jory's back is broken. He is in a full body cast and will be for months. And once he is out of the cast, he will never walk or dance again. And Kathy is heartbroken and she is terrified because Jory's whole life was dancing, just like Julian's was. And like Julian, that has been taken away from Jory. The cycle is repeating all over again. Kathy is terrified that she could lose Jory the way that she lost Julian all those years ago. And Jory is understandably devastated when Chris gives him the news, and he slips into this deep depression where he refuses to speak to or even look at anyone. And when Chris and Kathy go to bring Melody to see him, thinking that, she'll want to see him and that he would want to see her, she adamantly refuses and questions what kind of life they're going to have now that Jory is going to be in a wheelchair, and if he can even be a father to their child. And she even suggests that maybe Jory would have preferred that he had died instead. The implication being that maybe that's what she would have preferred instead. And let me preface the arc that Melody's character is about to take by saying this, because her character is going to take a very hard downward arc from this point forward, and you're not going to like her very much. In fact, you're going to straight up hate her. But to give her at least a little bit of grace and to maybe kind of understand where she's coming from, because again, you're not going to like her very much, Jory and Melody's whole life is ballet. Everything that they are, everything that they have is because of ballet. Hell, it's the reason they met and fell in love in the first place. And Melody later admits to Kathy that it's this fantasy world of dancing that they live in that she prefers to the real world. When I was old enough, I ran to hide in the ballet. I told myself only in the world of fantasy could I find happiness. When I met Jory, he seemed the prince I needed. Princes don't fall and injure their spinal cords, Kathy. They are never crippled. How could I live with Jory when I don't see him as a prince anymore? How, Kathy? Tell me how I can blind my eyes and numb my senses so I won't feel revulsion when he touches me. What happened to Jory is absolutely devastating, and their lives are going to look very different moving forward than they always imagined they would look. And Melody, by her own admission, does not have the skills to cope with that. She has enough self-awareness that she recognizes that in herself. That being said, this absolutely does not justify the way that she treats and talks about Jory from this point forward. Because the way that she treats him and the way that she talks about him is absolutely vile and inexcusable. Yes, she has enough self-awareness to recognize that these are issues that she has. However, that does not excuse the language, the shitty way that she treats Jory moving forward, because it is absolutely vile. And while the entire family is absolutely reeling and trying to process this terrible thing that has happened, Jory sinks deeper and deeper into depression. It gets so bad that he stops eating and has to be fed intravenously. And meanwhile, Melody is refusing to see him and spends most of her time locked up in another room. She has left the bedroom that they shared. And Bart hasn't visited either. And it's while they are trying to process all of this that Cindy reveals that she doesn't think it was an accident at all. She thinks someone tried to kill Jory. Specifically, she thinks Bart tried to kill Jory, because when he was first taken to the hospital, she overheard him on the phone talking about a special insurance policy he'd taken out in case any of the guests were injured, which Chris points out isn't that weird given the size of the party, and sometimes homeowners insurance doesn't cover things like that, but that's not the only thing that Cindy points out. Mama, you picked up a handful of that sand that spilled from the columns when they broke. Wasn't the sand supposed to be dry? It wasn't dry. Someone made it wet, and that made it heavier. The sand didn't come pouring out like it was supposed to. It made those columns stand upright, and the sand clumped down on Jory like cement. Otherwise, Jory wouldn't have been hurt so severely. I don't think Bart tried to kill Jory. Their relationship is contentious at times and overly competitive, but, and despite the crap he does later, because it's not going to seem like the case, but I think Bart does love his brother, and he genuinely struggles with his guilt at having pushed Jory to perform at his party. So I don't think Bart tried to kill Jory. I think Joel did. And I think he did it because he was jealous. Malcolm hated Joel. He absolutely despised him because he wanted to go into music rather than business. He berated him at the best of times and ignored him the rest of the time. And when Joel decided to follow his dreams, Malcolm disowned and disinherited him. It was like Joel was dead to him. And here's Jory, who is young and beautiful and a successful artist who is loved and supported by his family. Everything that Joel never got to have. As we circle back to why I think Joel came back, because again, I don't think it was just for the money, but I also don't think he simply started feeling nostalgic and missed his sister. I'm not saying that he didn't miss Corrine because they were very close to their sister, but I think Joel came back for the money and for revenge. That he sees himself as some kind of avenging angel sent to strike down his sinful family and collect the money that was rightfully owed to him. That's just what I think anyway. And although he's still deeply angry and depressed, Kathy is able to do what she couldn't with Julian all those years ago. She is able to convince Jory that he is more than just a dancer, that his life isn't over because he won't be able to dance again. She convinces him to keep living. She couldn't save Julian, but she saves Jory. Yet she also realizes that while Jory is recovering and Melody is struggling, that they're not going to be leaving Foxworth Hall anytime soon. They are trapped there again. But Cindy is sick of being there. Bart is actively ignoring her. Joel is constantly judging her. She's far away from her friends, and it's kind of boring there. So she leaves for a summer theater camp near Boston. And Chris and Kathy also decide that they can't leave Jory under Bart and Joel's care, so they're staying at Foxworth Hall for the foreseeable future, as it's going to be the best place for Jory once he's finally released from the hospital. Jory and Melody live in a small apartment in New York City, and Foxworth Hall can be made more accessible a lot easier than it can. It's close to Jory's doctors and physical therapists, and even has a pool that he can use in his therapy. So, as much as they'd like to get the hell out of there, it's really the best place for Jory and Melody right now. But, much to Kathy's sadness, despite being retired, Chris decides he wants to start working in medical research, specifically in cancer research, because he still wants to keep helping people. And I think this line kind of sums up where we are at this point in the story perfectly. With arms around each other, we entered the huge house that waited with its gaping jaws wide. So several weeks pass since Jory's accident, and Melody still has not visited him, and Kathy is sick of it. So Kathy physically drags Melody to the hospital and forces her to finally visit her husband, basically telling her to fake it until she makes it. But Melody is really bad at faking it, and Jory is understandably pissed that his mom literally had to force his own wife to visit him after he has spent weeks in the hospital, so the visit goes pretty badly. Jory tells Melody to leave if that's what she wants, to go back to New York and file for divorce, that he won't contest it and she can find a new dancing partner, that he'll let her go. And though she tells him she wants to stay with him and that they can make a new life for each other, both Kathy and Jory and us can see that the love that she had for him is all but gone. But, at least in this instant, she does try and even keeps visiting a few times. It's not long after these visits start that Melody confesses to Kathy that things between her and Jory weren't as picture perfect as everyone thought. That she intentionally stopped taking her birth control because she wanted to have a baby before she was 30. Remember, both she and Jory are 29 years old at this point. whereas they'd agreed that they wanted to be at the top of their careers for at least 10 years before starting a family. And this led to a really ugly fight between the two of them, where Jory demanded that she get an abortion. So she feels guilty because they should have been in London rather than at Bart's party. She also hates being in Foxworth Hall, because like Kathy, she can feel the evil, that poison, that is all around them. Now, this is a long-ish passage, but it's relevant, and I think it really succinctly sums up what Foxworth Hall is like better than I ever could. Something weird about this house. Something strange and frightening. When everyone is gone and Bart is in his office, Joel is praying in that ugly bare room. I lay on my bed and seem to hear the house whispering. It seems to call to me. I hear the wind blow as if it's trying to tell me something. I hear the floor squeak outside my door, so I jump up and race to throw open the door. And no one is there. No one is ever there. I suspect it's only my imagination, but I hear, as you've said you do sometimes, so much of what isn't real. Am I losing my mind, Kathy? Am I? Melody, I murmured, trying to draw her close again, but she put me off by moving to the far end of the sofa. Kathy, why is this house different? Different from what? I asked uneasily. From all other houses. She glanced fearfully toward the door to the hall. Don't you feel it? Can't you hear it? Do you sense the house is breathing, like it has a life of its own? My eyes widened as a chill stole the comfort from my pretty sitting room. In the bedroom, I could faintly hear Chris's regular heavy breathing. He, usually too reticent to talk, gushed onward breathlessly. This house wants to use the people inside of it as a way to keep on living forever. It's like a vampire, sucking our lifeblood from all of us. I wish it hadn't been restored. It's not a new house. It's been here for centuries. Only the wallpaper and the paint and the furniture are new. But those stairs in the foyer I never climb up or descended without the seeing the ghosts of others. Despite vehemently agreeing with her, there is something wrong, something dark and something haunted about Foxworth Hall. Kathy desperately tries to reassure Melody that there's nothing wrong with the house and that they're safe. But this is also where Melody lets slip that she's been spending a lot of time with Bart while they've been visiting Jory. But totally as friends. Just totally as friends, guys. Come on. Once Jory comes home to a set of suites that have been made fully accessible, Corrine's will is finally read, as they couldn't do it because Jory needed to be there and needed to be fully aware for them to do so. And Bart insists that they read it literally the afternoon that he comes home. And it does not go the way Bart has always been promised that it would go. My grandson, Bartholomew Winslow Scott Sheffield, who will eventually claim his rightful surname of Foxworth, reaches the age of 25, read the man in his 60s with the glasses perched low on his nose. He will be given an annual sum of $500,000 until he reaches the age of 35. At this stated age, the remainder of my estate, hereafter called the Corrine Foxworth Winslow Trust, will be turned over entirely to my grandson, Bartholomew Winslow Scott Sheffield Foxworth. My firstborn son, Christopher Garland Sheffield Foxworth, will remain in his position as trustee until the aforesaid time. If he, the trustee, should not survive until the time when my grandson Bartholomew Winslow Scott Sheffield Foxworth reaches the age of 35, then my daughter Catherine Sheffield Foxworth shall be named as replacement trustee until my aforesaid grandson reaches his 35th birthday. Even from the grave, Corrine is still screwing people over, which is very on brand for her. And Bart is pissed. And he blames who he always blames, Chris. And Bart promises that he is going to make Chris pay. So the tension in the family just gets even worse, and Bart's resentment of Chris continues to deepen. As the months pass, Jory, now free from his body cast, begins physical therapy and starts learning how to use an electric wheelchair. Things are still awkward between him and Bart, though he comes to see Jory every so often. And things are also still awkward with Melody. And since her slip-up that day, with Jory home and recovering his strength, and without that worry blinding her, Kathy begins to notice just how much time Melody and Bart are actually spending together. Before all this, they had a very cool, very cordial relationship, at least on Melody's end. Now they're chilling at the pool and laughing and hanging out with each other and going out and having dinner together. And yes, they are sleeping together. They are sleeping together. Delilah has betrayed Samson with his brother. See, I told you it was relevant. And Kathy confronts them after she catches them together, because what they're doing is gross and weird and wrong. Bart tells Kathy that this isn't just a physical thing for him. He loves Melody. She's the first woman he's ever really loved and doesn't just want to use and then discard. And why doesn't Kathy want him to be happy? God, Mom, just be cool. And Kathy is like, that's great. I'm so glad that you realize women are people at the age of 25, but she's still your brother's wife. And she is literally pregnant with his child. You need to stop this. Kathy rightfully questions whether Bart actually loves Melody like he's saying, or if he just wants her because Jory has her, which honestly is a fair point, and between you and me, I think that is the reason. Because again, they've always had this very one-sided competition on Bart's side ever since he was a little kid. Are you sure, Bart? Do you truly love Melody, or do you just want her because she belongs to Jory? Turning on his back, his dark eyes met mine with more honesty than he'd ever shown. How those dark eyes pleaded for understanding. In the beginning, I wanted Melody only because she belonged to Jory. I honestly admit that. I wanted to take from him what he treasured most, because he'd taken from me what I treasured most. You. And it always comes back to Kathy. Kathy. She is the source of a lot of Bart's obsession. He loves her, yet he hates her. He wants to be the center of her whole world, and yet he despises her for her relationship with Chris. And he wants Melody to leave Jory and be with him, but she won't because she feels guilty. And Kathy and we know, however this ends, there is no way for it to end good. And spoiler alert, it ends very, very badly, but we'll get to that. So the house has been even more tense than usual, and Joel is still there, lurking around and condemning them for their sinful ways, resenting all of them. Especially Kathy. And I think it's because she can see him for what he is, rather than the pious, righteous man he pretends to be. She can see through the illusion, and he hates her for it. This is a conversation that they have after Kathy catches him snooping around, as he often does. You also remind me of your mother, he whispered in his thin, brittle voice, drawing his old bathrobe more tightly around his skinny frame. And you seem far too young to be in your 50s. My father used to say the wicked always managed to stay young and healthy longer than those who had a place waiting for them in heaven. If your father went to heaven, Joel, then I will gladly go in the opposite direction. She is iconic for that. She is iconic for that line. I don't always agree with what you do, but they could never make me hate you. They could never make me hate you. And although Kathy doesn't tell Jory or Chris, she urges Melody and Bart to break things off, which they don't do. And she also tries to convince Jory to leave Foxworth Hall. But he doesn't do that either. And that brings us to Christmas, which I'm sure will go totally fine. Bart is planning a massive Christmas ball, an even more massive celebration that is going to be bigger and better than his birthday had been. And once again, the whole family is back under one roof, and Jory is getting healthier and stronger every day, so naturally things, like I said, they're going to go just fine, right? Of course not. Of course not, besties. This is the Dollenganger series. Say it with me. We can't have nice things. And the first thing that starts to go wrong is that Chris has been working more and more, which means he's away more and more, and this leads to fights and friction between him and Kathy. Next is Melody has gone back to basically ignoring Jory and pining for Bart, who stopped sleeping with her when she started showing more. But again, it totally wasn't a physical thing, guys. It was love, okay? That's why he's totally rejecting her now that her body has changed. Like I said, he's a dick. That's mean. I stand by it. And so naturally, Cindy brings her new boyfriend home to meet the family, because why not? We don't have enough problems. And things actually go pretty well, and Bart seems to like him. Until Joel comes and tells Kathy that Lance, Cindy's boyfriend's name is Lance, by the way, snuck into Cindy's room, and they're hanging out biblically. Which Kathy doesn't believe, but yeah, they totally are, and she catches them together. And so does Bart, who is super normal about it. Just kidding. He beats the living daylights out of Lance. He beats him so badly that Kathy is actually worried that he might kill him. And while all this is going on, Joel shows up in the room and makes a dig about Cindy being just like Kathy, and it's that comment that makes Bart literally drop Lance's limp body to the floor to defend his mother. Unhinged behavior all around. Except Joel will not be swayed, and he even doubles down. Unexpectedly, Bart dropped Lance on the bed and hurled himself at Joel. "Stop it. Don't you dare tell my mother she's like her mother. She isn't. She isn't." "You'll see it my way eventually, Bart," said Joel in his softest, most sanctimonious tone. "Corrine got what she deserved, just as your mother will get hers one day. And if justice and right still rule in the world, and God is in his heaven, that indecent, naked girl on the floor trying to cover herself will meet her end in fiery flames, just like she deserves." Bart freaks out. He will not have Kathy spoken to like that unless it's by him. Ironically, again, he has that just obsessive love for her and that hatred, and those two things are often warring in himself. But like me, he will not stand for slander of Kathy, and so he scares Joel to the point where he actually leaves the room, straight up kicks Lance out of the house, beaten and bloody though he is. He wants to do the same to Cindy, doesn't and can't, because Kathy won't let him. And until he turns 35, the house is technically hers and Chris's. As you can imagine, this does wonders for the tension in the house. And that brings us to Christmas. And despite Cindy desperately trying to force a cheerful atmosphere, it is painfully awkward. Jory is trying desperately to get Melody back, or even to just look at him. She's trying to get Bart to look at her. Bart is ignoring her and glaring at Cindy and Chris, and Joel is standing there ominously. I'm messy and I live for drama, so I was living for this. And then the family starts exchanging gifts, and everything goes completely sideways. Since he came home from the hospital, Jory has been working on building a really intricate model of a clipper ship in a bottle. It's a really cool piece that Bart admires, and Jory plans on gifting it to Bart for Christmas. And Bart is genuinely so excited to open it. Except when he does, the ship is in pieces. It is literally broken beyond repair to the point where it's described as looking almost like toothpicks and string. And Bart thinks Jory did this on purpose. So he tells everyone in the middle of them exchanging gifts that he has been sleeping with Melody for months. Again, in the middle of them exchanging gifts. "I should have known you would find the perfect way to repay me for sleeping with your wife." Stunned silence rumbled louder than any thunder. Melody sat on, blankly staring, seeming an empty shell, even as she mumbled on and on about how much she hated this house. Jory's eyes went starkly blank. Had he guessed all along? All of Jory's color vanished before he could finally force his eyes to look at Melody. "I don't believe you, Bart. You've always had a nasty, hateful way of kicking where it hurts most." "I'm not lying," lashed out Bart, disregarding the pain he was inflicting on Jory, on me, and Chris. "While you lay in your hospital bed inside your cast, your wife and I shared a bed, and eagerly enough, she spread her legs for me." Bart is a real classy individual. After that, everything just descends into chaos. Screaming, crying, Bart laughing, Cindy slapping Melody. Merry Christmas, everyone! So who smashed the ship? Kathy thinks it was Joel, and I think it was too. And I think he did it to drive a wedge between Bart and his family, to further isolate him and make him lean more on Joel. Just like John Amos did all those years ago. That, it's time for the Foxworth Christmas Ball. So everyone gets all dressed up except Joel, who leaves with a final warning to Bart that the party is a waste of time and money and goes to bed. The house is lavishly decorated. There's expensive food and expensive alcohol, and no one shows up. Not a soul. They wait, and no one comes. Red beeswax bayberry candles burned lower and lower. Towering gelatin masterpieces began to sag. Melted cheeses began to toughen, and the heating sauces thickened. Crepe batter waited to be poured on turned over thick pans while chefs eyed each other curiously. I had to look away from all that was going so badly. Bart is so confused and so hurt and so angry because everyone he invited, school friends, business contacts, people from other wealthy families, literally all of Virginia high society, Every single one of them RSVP'd that they'd be there. So this is just another rejection, another thing to make him feel less than. And despite Cindy trying to salvage the situation by playing Christmas carols, and this is where the family learns that she is actually an incredibly talented singer and musician, the damage is already done, and there's no undoing it. I should have known it would turn out this way. He glanced bitterly at Jory. Perhaps they came to my birthday party only to see you dance, and now when you can't, to hell with me. They've snubbed me, and they're going to pay for it, he said in a hard, cold voice, louder and stronger than Joel's, but with the same kind of zealot's fury. Before I'm through, there won't be a house in a 20-mile radius that doesn't belong to me. I'll ruin them. All of them. With the power of the Foxworth Trust behind me, I can borrow millions, and then I'll buy out the banks and demand they pay off their mortgages, buy out the village stores and close them down. I'll hire other attorneys, fire the ones I have now, and see that they're disbarred. I'll find new stockbrokers, hire new real estate agents, see that the real property estate values are undermined, and when they sell cheap, I'll buy. By the time I'm through, there won't be an old aristocratic family in Virginia left side of Charlottesville, and not one of my business colleagues will be left with anything but debts to pay off. Then you'll feel satisfied? Asked Chris. No, flared Bart, eyes hard and glaring. I won't be satisfied until justice is ruled. I have done nothing to deserve this night, nothing but try to give them what our ancestors did, and they rejected me. They'll pay, and then they'll pay some more. Know who he sounds like in that moment? That with that anger, that need for retribution and revenge? Do you know who he sounds like? He sounds like Kathy. He sounds like his mother, and she hears it too. And that terrifies her, because she knows the price that comes along with revenge. And that's a price she doesn't want Bart to pay. But she's also scared that it might be too late to stop him. Everyone finally goes to bed. Kathy snoops in Bart's office and finds the RSVP cards. All 250 of them. All of them saying yes. And these are the invitations that Joel mailed out weeks ago. Yeah, Joel. So Kathy, being Kathy, confronts him because he's sitting up in his room literally laughing at Bart's misery. After Kathy confronts him about tampering with the invitations, and he denies it. You're lying, Joel, I said, taking a wild shot in the dark. You didn't mail those invitations. You brought them up here, and in the privacy of this room, you opened each one and filled in the blank places for yes, we will be happy to attend. And then you mailed those in the provided envelopes back to Bart. You see, I found them in Bart's office. I never saw such a strange assortment of crooked handwriting in various shades of blue, violet, green, black, and brown ink. Joel, you changed pens to make it seem like the cards were all signed by different guests, but it was you who signed them all. And Joel denies all of this, and Bart is so lost in his own misery that he doesn't believe Kathy when she tries to tell him. And Bart is now drunk. He is completely wasted, and he confesses that he still thinks Kathy doesn't love him. And he so desperately wants her to love him, and this breaks her heart, and she asks him what on earth can she possibly do to show him that she loves him. And he has only one request, and that is to let go of Chris. And it's the one thing that Kathy cannot do, even if she wanted to. She tried. She can't let go of Chris. Not even for Bart. Send Chris away, he said tonelessly, as if he'd said this without hope of ever seeing Chris gone from my life. That will tell me you love me. Only when you break with him can I feel good about myself and you. Pain stabbed at me. He'd die without me, Bart, I whispered. I know you can't understand the way it is between us, and I myself can't explain why he needs me and why I need him, except we were young and alone and in a terrifying situation, and we only had each other. We created this fantasy dream-like world when we were locked away and trapped ourselves, and in doing so, and now that we're middle-aged, we still live in that fantasy. We can't survive without it. To lose him would destroy not only him, but me as well. "But mother," he cried out passionately, turning to hold me, to press his face between my breasts, "you'd still have me." He gazed up into my face, his arms around my waist. "I want you to purify your soul before it's too late. What you do with Chris is against the rules of God and society. Let him go, mother. Let him go before someone does something terrible. Let go of the love you have for your brother." This whole conversation is so heartbreaking and just so utterly devastating. Kathy can't let Chris go. And as much as Bart loves her, because like I said way back in the beginning, he absolutely does love her, he hates her for being with Chris and he wants to save her. He keeps her on this pedestal, yet doesn't think she's worthy of being on the pedestal. Yet he can't set her aside or truly believe that she loves him. This is all just so painfully and horribly tragic and utterly heartbreaking. Things take a really weird turn where Bart starts talking about Cindy and how she's been tempting him, which between you and me, I genuinely do not think that is the case. And he accuses Kathy of doing the same thing to Chris when they were locked up in the attic all those years ago. And she again tries to make Bart understand something literally unimaginable, because how could she make him understand what it was like, what it did to them? She can't. And later that night, Melody goes into labor because we don't have enough going on. And because the snow is so bad and Foxworth Hall is so isolated, Chris and Kathy end up delivering the babies. Yep, I said babies. Melody gives birth to twins, a little boy and a little girl, with blonde hair and blue eyes. While Jory takes after Julian, he has dark hair and dark eyes. Melody has blonde hair and blue eyes, hence the twins ended up looking more like her. Just like Corey and Carrie, too. The same twins. Doppelgangers. Chris looked up, his rubber-gloved hands quite bloody. "No, Kathy," he stated firmly. "Not doppelgangers. These are not the same twins born again. Remember that. Carrie came first then, this time the boy first. This is not an unlucky doomed set of children. These two will have only the best." Despite Chris's words, Kathy can't help but think that this is her chance. This is her chance to do over with this set of twins and give them a life that Corey and Carrie never did. And they named the twins Darren and Deirdre. Jory's logic being that there was a set of twins with C names and now there is a set of twins with D names as a way to honor them. And he is even more determined to finally get his family out of Foxworth Hall. Except Melody really struggles after the birth of the twins. She struggles to bond with them, she's angry and resentful and horribly sad, and makes little attempt to care for Darren and Deirdre, often leaving them wet and crying for hours. The implication here is that Melody is really struggling with postpartum depression after the twins are born. And eventually things come to a head and Melody leaves completely when they're only a few months old and goes back to New York to return to her career. I'm going to read the letter that Melody leaves Jory, and full disclosure, it's ableist. It's really ableist. So if that's not something you want to listen to, there's a time skip below if you need it. "My dearest darling Jory, I am a coward. I've always known that and hoped you'd never find out. You were always the one with all the strength. I love you and no doubt will always love you, but I can't live with a man who can never make love to me again. I look at you in that horrible chair that you've grown to accept when I cannot accept it, or your handicap. Your parents come to my room and confronted me and urged me to face up to you and say everything I feel. I'm unable to do that. For if I do, you might say or do something that would change my mind, and I've got to leave or lose my mind. You see, my love, I already feel half insane from being in this house, this horrible, hateful house with all its deceiving beauty. I lie on my lonely bed and dream of the ballet. I hear the music playing even when it isn't. I've got to go back to where I can hear it play, and if that is ugly and selfish, as I know it is, forgive me if you can. Say kind things about me to our children when they're old enough to ask questions about their mother. Say nice words even if they aren't true. For I know that I've failed you just as much as I failed them. I've given you every reason to hate me, but please don't remember me with hate. Remember me as I used to be when we were younger, and very much in control of our lives. Don't blame yourself for anything or blame anyone else for what I have done. Everything is my own fault. You see, I'm not real. I never was. I never will be. I can't face up to the kind of cruel reality that destroys lives and leaves behind broken dreams. Then, too, remember this: I am the fantasy you helped create out of your own desire and my own. So farewell, my love, my first and sweetest love, and sadly perhaps my only true love. Find someone rare like your mother who can take my place. She's the one who gave you the ability to cope with reality no matter how harsh. God would have been kind if he had given me your kind of mother. Yours regretfully, Mel. Never see or hear from Melody again. And Jory has not one but two newborns, and he's still adjusting to being in a wheelchair, and finding an accessible place to live is expensive and time-consuming. So he, and therefore Chris and Kathy, keep staying at Foxworth Hall. Melody did a lot wrong. My God, she did a lot wrong. But she had a point about the house being not unlike a vampire. It needs people, and it's not going to let them go now that it has them. Meanwhile, Bart is absolutely spiraling. He refuses to have another party in the house, even refusing to let Kathy throw Jory a birthday party, which, I mean, like, you already stole the guy's wife. At least let him have a birthday party, damn. He's barely home, spending most of his nights drinking at the local gentleman's club, when he's not actively destroying the businesses and lives of the people who snubbed, please imagine the air quotes, his Christmas ball. This even leads one person to take their own life after their business falls apart. And this makes the villagers hate them even more. And when he's not doing that, he's throwing cruel jabs at his family when he is home. He's also building a church on the grounds. A church where he intends to make his family attend every Sunday, with Joel serving as the pastor. And given not only Bart's history with religion, but because of the religious abuse she and her siblings suffered under Olivia, Kathy is not crazy about this idea. Soon, however, Cindy returns home for summer break, and she's in great spirits. Hell, she's even being nice and trying to get along with Bart, which he's inherently suspicious of. And the nicer she is to him, the worse he treats her. And the thing is, even Kathy is finding it harder and harder to be around Bart. That doesn't mean she doesn't love him. She does. She loves him with all her heart. But Bart is mean and Bart is cruel, and it is draining to be around him, and it is hurting the people around him. And then Bart catches Cindy sleeping with a guy named Victor that she's been casually seeing since she came back to Virginia. He catches them literally in a bush together, by the way. And Bart beats this poor guy unconscious and then drags Cindy, who's completely naked, to a small shack in the woods where Joel is waiting. And they lay Cindy on the cold, hard ground and stand over her, calling her absolutely vile and cruel and disgusting things, and telling her that she's dirty and disgusting and bad and evil and wicked, and that she's going to hell. This goes on for hours, with these two men just verbally abusing this naked, terrified girl. I'm not going to attempt to unpack all that because, quite frankly, I don't think I'm qualified, but that is absolutely terrifying and traumatic and sick. It is sick. Now, Kathy doesn't tell anyone about this until much later because she's ashamed and traumatized and terrified. But regardless, I don't think Chris and Kathy handle the situation well. While they acknowledge that Bart beating up Victor was wrong, and I get that they don't want their still teenage daughter doing what Cindy's doing, but she's still the one that ends up being punished. And in my opinion, that's not fair. I really don't like the way Cindy is treated and shamed in this book. And not long after she arrives, Cindy ends up leaving for New England to attend a summer theater program as she wants to be an actress and cannot stand being in the house with Bart any longer, and I don't blame her. While all this is happening, Chris hires a nurse named Toni Winters to help Jory with the twins, and she's great with the kids, and she's a great nurse. She's also funny and kind and sweet, and she and Bart start seeing each other, and things are really good. Hell, they're great. They're happy. Bart is happy. But Joel is always there, always whispering in Bart's ear that Toni doesn't really love him, that she just wants his money, and women, especially beautiful women, can't be trusted. All that same misogynistic nonsense that he got from Malcolm's Journal and John Amos is still being whispered in his ear. And slowly but surely, that poisons their relationship. and he starts being cold and cruel to Tony until she finally gets fed up and breaks up with him, though she continues working at Foxworth Hall. She's better than me, I'd quit. Their Christmas and New Year's come and go, and that spring Bart finally opens his chapel. He then demands his family attend this hours-long sermon given by Joel about hellfire and sin and how they're all going to burn in the deepest fires of hell. And when Darren and Deirdre, who are literal toddlers, get restless and bored, because again they are literal toddlers, Bart is super normal about it. Twins were restless, like all children their age, and didn't like the pew, the confinement, the dullness of the overlong services. Only when we stood to sing hymns did they stare up at us and seem enchanted. Sing, sing, Bart encouraged, leaning to pinch a tiny arm or tug on golden locks. Take your hands off my children, Jory snapped. They will sing or not sing. It's their choice. We stopped attending services not long after that. Jory is better than me. I would have fought my brother in the street, but I digress. And the years just keep going on. Bart and Joel are slipping deeper and deeper into their religious fanaticism. Melody and Jory divorced via mail, and she remarries someone from their old ballet company not long after. Jory and Tony begin a relationship. The twins are happy, healthy, and loved. Chris's cancer research is going well, and he's making some great breakthroughs. Cindy's acting career is thriving and after she graduates high school, but she's coming home less and less. Things are okay apart from the usual and seemingly perpetual and eternal family tension. So at this point, why don't they leave? Honestly, I think it's because they get comfortable. Foxworth Hall, despite everything else that it is a beautiful house. It's been made accessible for Jory. The twins have spent their entire lives there. Hell, they were born in one of the bedrooms. And they're all together. I think they get comfortable, and that's how the darkness seeps back in. Kathy overhears Darren and Deirdre talking about sinning and being sinners, and Jory tells her about the weird little things that have been happening to him that start out as kind of petty and childish and mean, and escalate to full-on dangerous psycho behavior. Things go missing and then turn up in places that they weren't before. There's bugs in his coffee, someone kills his pet fish, and leaves tacks in on his wheelchair and nails in his shoes, which could give him an infection and potentially kill him because of his disability. And one night, someone snuck into his room and opened all the windows while he was sleeping, and pulled off his blankets so that he gets cold and rained on. They then proceeded to hide his buzzer so he couldn't call for help. So Jory fell out of bed trying to get help, only to wake up back in bed in dry pajamas. All that is absolutely terrifying, and Jory thinks Bart is behind it. They need to leave. And not only do they need to leave, they need to let go of Bart until he gets the help that he needs. And they need to get out of there before someone gets hurt. Honestly, I think it was probably both Bart and Joel who were doing these things to Jory. I think it was Joel who opened up all the windows in the attempt to get Bart sick. But I think it was Bart who felt guilty and eventually put Jory back into bed. Because Joel is hunched over, he's very old, he's very weak. And we learned from Chris that he has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He is sick and he is dying. So Joel couldn't have picked Jory back up, but Bart could have. So I think they're working together to try and torment him. I think Jory is absolutely right, and Joel's behavior is escalating, and it's only a matter of time before someone gets seriously hurt. It's time to go. It's been time to go for a long time. Though Kathy agrees with and believes Jory, she cannot bring herself to leave Bart alone in this awful place with Joel. She has to try and save him. And she sees him and Joel sneaking Darren and Deirdre into the chapel, where they have been taking them for who knows how long. And they go because they like hearing Bart sing. He's a very talented singer, and he's their uncle, and they love him. And she follows them, and she hears Bart and Joel telling the twins that they're evil, that they're devil's spawn and devil's issue. All the horrible things that Corrine used to tell them, that she used to tell Corey and Carrie. This is what Kathy overhears in the chapel, and this to me is one of the most chilling moments in this entire series. This is Joel preaching, for your reference. Speak and tell me, Darren Deirdre. Speak the words you're supposed to keep forever in your minds and hearts. Speak and let God hear you. They had such babyish small voices that seldom said more than a few words at a time. They sometimes used the wrong syntax, but this time they intoned as correctly and as seriously as adults. Bart listened carefully as if he'd helped coach them. We are children born of evil seed. We are the devil's issue, the devil's spawn. We inherited all the evil genes that lead to incestuous relationships. Pleased with themselves, they grinned at each other for having said it right, not understanding in the least the meaning of the words. It's that moment that is the last straw for Kathy. She will not let Bart or anyone else do to her grandchildren what was done to her. As much as she loves Bart, she cannot keep setting herself on fire to keep him warm. And she cannot sacrifice Darren and Deirdre and Jory and Chris and Tony and Cindy to make up for the guilt that she feels about how he came into the world or for lying to him. She cannot do that to her family. It's time to let go. Except Jory gets sick. Probably from Joel and Bart opening his windows and leaving him in the rain. He gets so sick that he nearly dies. Though thankfully he recovers, and it's during a brief visit from Cindy to check on Jory when he was sick that Cindy finally tells Kathy about that night in the woods and what Bart and Joel did to her. And that just solidifies things for her and Chris. It's time to go. Chris finds a house in Charlottesville that's big enough for all of them and can be renovated easily to be accessible with land and privacy, and so it's settled. They are leaving as soon as Chris settles a few things with his lab. And once he realizes they're leaving, Bart again begs Kathy to let Chris go, to leave him once and for all. I could have loved him if he'd only stayed my uncle. You should have known better than to try and deceive me. You should know by now all children grow to ask questions and remember well scenes you think they'll soon forget. But those children don't forget. They take those memories and bury them deep in their brains to bring them out later when they can understand. And all that I can remember tells me the two of you are bound in ways that seem unbreakable except by death. My heart quickened. On the roof of Foxworth Hall, under the sun and stars, Chris and I had sworn certain vows to see us through eternity. How young and foolish to create our own traps. Tears so easily flooded my eyes lately. Bart, how can I live without him? Oh, Mother, you could, you know you could. Let him go, Mother. Give to me the kind of decent, God-fearing mother I've always needed to help keep my sanity. If I can't say goodbye to Chris, what then, Bart? His dark head bowed. God help you, Mother. I won't be able to. God help me too. Even so, I do have to think of my own eternal soul. I went away. Again, Kathy tries desperately to make him understand something that he will never truly be able to. And while she acknowledges that she shouldn't have lied to him, she tells him that Chris has always loved him, has always tried to be the best father he could be for him, and that as much as she loves Bart, she cannot stay in this place any longer. She can't let him keep hurting everyone else. Mothers always seem to run and leave the sons to suffer. Why are you deserting me? The tone of his throaty voice, filled with pain, filled me with suffering. Still I said what I had to say. Because you deserted me years ago, I answered brokenly. I love you, Bart. I've always loved you, and though you don't want to believe it, Chris loves you. But you don't want his love. You tell yourself each day that you live that your own natural father would have been a better father, but you don't know that he would have been. He wasn't faithful to his wife, my mother, and I wasn't his first dalliance. I don't want to speak disrespectfully of a man whom I loved very much at the time, but he wasn't the same kind of man as Chris. He wouldn't have given you so much of himself. The sun through the windows turned Bart's face fire red. He moved his head from side to side, tormented again. At his sides, his hands clenched into tight fists. Don't say one more word, he shouted. He's the father I want, have always wanted. Chris has given me nothing but shame and embarrassment. Get out. I'm glad you're leaving. Take your filth with you and forget I exist. Kathy has had enough. She even offers to have Chris turn over the role of trustee to Joel, whose face absolutely lights up with delight at this idea, but Bart shuts that down immediately and tells her, yeah, no, that's a great idea, turn it over to a lawyer, which she agrees to do. With that, they will be free of each other and their obligations to each other. They are finally going to leave Foxworth Hall and Bart behind. And this is the part where I would love to tell you that they leave Foxworth Hall once and for all and live out the rest of their lives in peace. I would absolutely love to tell you that. Except for the night that they're set to leave Foxworth Hall once and for all, Chris is late getting home. It gets later and later, and he still doesn't come home. Eventually, Bart comes out to ask why they're all still here, and it's then that Joel gleefully tells them about an accident he heard about on the highway. He tells them this just as the police arrive. I felt a scream in my throat ready to sound when I saw a white car heading up our private road, a red light spinning on the top. Time turned backward. No, no, no. Over and over again, my brain screamed even as they spilled out the facts about the accident. The doctor who jumped out of his car to help the injured and dying victims laid on the roadside. And as he ran to cross the highway, he'd been struck by a hit-and-run driver. They carefully, respectfully put his things on the table, just as they dumped my father's possessions on another table in Gladstone. This time, I was staring at all the items that Chris usually carried in his pockets. All of this was unreal, just another nightmare to wake up from. Not my photograph in his wallet, not my Chris's wristwatch, and the sapphire ring I'd given him for Christmas. Not my Christopher doll. No, no, no. In that horrible instant, Kathy is the last of her siblings. She's outlived them all, and there is something so horribly cruel about that. Even crueler that he died not unlike their father did all those years ago. But, like Christopher's death set all these events in motion, with Chris's death, the cycle breaks. Bart realizes for all his faults that Chris loved him, and he sets about trying to make amends. He gives a moving eulogy at Chris's funeral and starts using his wealth and even his faith to actually try and help people. He does end up becoming a televangelist, but of the joy and love and peace and acceptance variety, rather than the fire and brimstone and hell variety. Joel realizes that he's not going to get any of the money, and not only that, he has completely lost his hold on Bart. So Joel returns to the monastery, and Bart finally makes peace with his family and even acknowledges Cindy, who is a rising moving star, as his sister. And now I'm going to talk about the movie. Why? Because in the movie, Bart and Cindy end up in a romantic relationship and start sleeping together the night he catches her and Victor. And while overall I like the movie, this bothers me to no end, because I think it misses the entire point. Bart and Cindy get to just be brother and sister. They break the cycle that started with Christopher and Corrine all those years ago. They get to be brother and sister. And to me, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. That they get to just be brother and sister. They do not end up in a romantic relationship together. And also, there's enough incest in this series. We didn't need more. But I digress. Jory doesn't follow in Julian's footsteps. He finds a life outside of dancing. He becomes a successful artist, is a doting and loving father, and he even finds love again. Darren and Deirdre don't grow up trapped and neglected and abused like Corey and Carrie did. They are loved and they are safe and they are happy and free. And that brings us back to Kathy. While she's happy there's finally peace in her family, that the cycle is finally broken, she is shattered at losing Chris. But she knows that her children and grandchildren are going to be okay, that they're free from the cycle that destroyed so many lives. Jory is going to marry Tony, and they're going to have a baby who they're going to name either Kathy if it's a girl or Chris if it's a boy. And Bart is finally at peace, and he and Cindy have a relationship. They get to be siblings. They're going to be okay. And there is a certain peace to be had in that realization. But she cannot go on without Chris. But it's because she knows that her family is going to be okay that Kathy returns to the attic one last time. All of this was on my mind, making me vaguely happy for Jory and Tony, happy for Bart and Cindy, as I turned toward the dual winding staircases that would take me up, up, up. I heard the wind from the mountains calling late at night, telling me it was my time to go. And I woke up knowing what to do. Once I was in that cold, dim room without furniture or carpet or rugs, only a dollhouse that wasn't as wonderful as the original. I opened the tall and narrow closet door and began my ascent up the steep and narrow stairs, on my way to the attic, on my way to where I'd find my Christopher again. The epilogue is told from Jory's point of view, and from him we learn that Trevor, the caretaker of Foxworth Hall, found Kathy sitting in a window of the attic that she'd decorated with paper flowers. And while the Dollenganger saga does seem to end on a very hopeful note, the cycle is broken, Kathy's children and grandchildren are safe, it is also such a deeply tragic end to me. Kathy was never truly able to escape Foxworth Hall. She is finally consumed by the metaphorical haunted house that she could never really escape. She, in a lot of ways, is Foxworth Hall's final victim. But the cycle finally stops with her. It won't claim any more of her family's lives. Final thoughts on the series as a whole. Are these books kind of pulpy and schlocky? Yeah, absolutely. But they're also a stark, uncomfortable, and painful look at the cycle of generational trauma and the devastating consequences that it can have, and how you have to break those cycles. And breaking them is ugly and hard, but it has to be done so that you can finally find peace. The Dollenganger series is a phenomenal piece of gothic and familial horror that, as you can see, I have truly never really recovered from. Thanks so much for coming on this very strange journey with me. Sorry this one took so long. Without getting too deep into the woods that is my personal life, I have 2 jobs and one of them is aggressively back in full swing. And as you can hopefully not tell too much by my voice, I was really sick recently and just very recently got my voice back. So this one took a little longer to get out than I planned, and I'm sorry about that. Now, this isn't going to be our last visit to the Dollenganger series, for better or for worse, but it is going to be our last visit, at least for a little while. Though we're going to be talking about another of V.C. Andrews' works here in the very near-ish future. So thanks again for listening to all this, and my God, has it been a lot. And thank you for being here. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.